Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. How y'all doing today? I'm Ray of Light. And we're going to have a conversation with David Rice today. We're going to talk about reparations and his organization Reparations Now. So, David Rice, thank you for being here, brother. Appreciate you. Appreciate you a lot.
It's always a pleasure, my brother. We had a good time last week, and we look forward to doing this every week.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, what I wanted to ask you about first is just a basic overview, just getting right to the meat and potatoes, man,
Mhm.
of how would reparations be distributed in your view? Because a lot of times people have the conversation and the question comes up always, well, how will it be distributed? That sounds like something real complicated. So can we start there right quick?
Yeah, and I'm going to repeat the question just in case there are viewers over on Facebook that may be looking at it live. The question is, how will reparations be distributed from the proposal that I support? And obviously, there's been lots of talk about this. Obviously, there have been several congressional hearings uh, dating back several years. I mean, actually, the reparations legislation talks are almost 40 years old now, where it was actually officially a part of the U.S. Congress or the U.S. Senate, and they had hearings on them. But we know in the last 2 years they've had several hearings. They just didn't have one in 2020 during the quarantine period. But of course, the commission started back up this year with Resolution HR 40. Hopefully, all the viewers are familiar with that. If you're not, please look it up. HR 40 is an actual House of Representatives commission that's designed to study just this very question. How would it be um, paid? What are the possibilities? What are the pitfalls? What are the pros and the cons? And of course, they've given a lot of people opportunity to speak that oppose reparations. It may surprise some of us, black descendants of slaves, but there are a lot of black folks who don't believe we should get reparations. I find that very hard to believe, but that's part of this process. Our job is just like your question. I need to explain why I think my proposal is the best, and the approach that I think we should use is the best, and also why anyone who doesn't think we should have reparations should change their mind and understand the cost that's been paid by slaves over the last, you know, 300 years. And of course, we're the descendants of the slaves. So here's my proposal in a nutshell. Obviously, I did a video at the beginning of this week and I explained that what I calculated and others have agreed with is that basically we are owed somewhere between 20 and 40 trillion dollars based on what the net worth of the United States is at this moment. The net worth of the United States is 100 trillion dollars. Actually more than that, but low 100s, but above 100 trillion dollars. And if you think of free slave labor for 300 plus years, or even if you said it was only 250 years, you'd be talking about, I believe, an easy calculation, and I've tried to simplify this to a third. We're not saying that slaves contributed everything to America, but they were certainly making the major contributions to the backbone of America, and it allowed America to cheat and get ahead in the race against other nations. That's why they were able to break away from a kingdom like Great Britain and come over here and actually exceed Great Britain. Because for 300 years, you had 300 years of free labor. You abused, you had atrocities, you murdered, you lynched, you raped, and you pillaged, and you did everything you could to get ahead of Great Britain. And it happened on the backs of slaves. And so my calculation is that at least a third, which is 33 and a third trillion dollars, is what is owed for us in reparations. Now, I believe that the first disbursement of that would be considered a down payment because I think that, first of all, anytime you're going to sell someone who has the money on providing the money, even if it's owed to you, you have to sell them on an amount that can be palatable so that they think it's economically feasible. If they feel like it's economically feasible, unfeasible, what they'll do is just turn off the whole conversation. And it's like, I like trying to compare it to going to a bank for a mortgage for a house or to go for a loan for a car or anytime you need to get money from the bank. They got the money, you need the money, or you want the money, or even if you feel like they've owed you the money, you have to compel them to give you the money. So the way I think we should best do it is that it would be dispersed through the Social Security Administration, because the Social Security Administration was set up almost 100 years ago now, during the after the Great Depression of 1929. And what that enumeration is about is that every person born in the United States of America and every citizen is supposed to have a social security number. And so black descendants of slaves would certainly be in that category because primarily most of us are natural born citizens. And so that's all we're dealing with. We're not talking about immigrants from other countries, Latin countries, Haiti, South America, uh, Canada, even parts of Africa. We're talking about primarily natural born citizens who are black descendants of slaves. So each of us has a social security number. And that's why the Social Security Administration is able to determine who gets what kind of money when they turn 62 or 65. So similarly, I think that's the best way to pay reparations. And that is to set up a reparations trust as a part of the Social Security Administration. And that trust would then make down payments. I would think the country need to make down payments in the first round of at least to $3 trillion. So that's like a tenth of what's owed. Again, if you got to put money in the trust, you got to have the administrators who are there to be, with the checks and the controls and the oversight so that they can manage the funds. And then just like you get your stimulus checks, they do it by your social security number or by the fact that you, uh, um, what do you call it? Did your taxes.
Right, right,
I
right.
couldn't
Yeah,
think of
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. I want to play some from your video, your
Okay.
address,
Sure.
um, because you got my mind going in a certain direction, and I think the people actually need to hear it. So let me share my screen right quick, fast.
Okay, we're here today to demand our reparations now. This is why we come every day. We, the black descendants of slaves in America, demand that reparations be paid for the wages that were stolen from slaves who toiled for over 300 years without any payment at all. You cannot say you're for the laborers if you're the president, like Joe Biden likes to say. Mr. President, you say you're a president for the laborers. You say you want to build from the bottom up and the middle out. Then you must start with the black descendants of slaves. You've got to pay the wages that have been stolen. These are unpaid wages that each slave earned from sun up to sundown every day. So imagine if you and your family, white America, had to go to work and toil in the harshest of conditions, in all types of elements, and work. And then at the end of each week, each day, each month, each year, you never got paid. Not 1 year, 2 years, not 50 years, not 100 years. 300 years of back pay is owed, and we demand that. And so that's
So the reason why I played that is the whole labor piece.
mhm.
I think that's an interesting angle if we deal with labor. Um, that I haven't heard anybody really talk about. So I started doing research and I was wondering what the labor laws were as far as the unions are concerned. And I found that they're against paying employees retroactively for lost wages. So I was just wondering what your thought was when it comes to. I like your angle when you speak on labor, and maybe we can deal with it as far as looking into, uh, union laws as far as labor rights and labor laws are concerned. What are your views on that?
Well, two things just before I address that. And please, I don't want anyone to think that I don't think this has to be a comprehensive uh, payment strategy because it does. We are owed much more than just the labor. But
Right.
I believe that is the focus where we need to, you know, approach the government and specifically this president. My messaging, as you know, is focusing on the president currently, Joe Biden. Joseph R. Biden has declared himself to be a friend of labor, and he's been that way for over 50 years. And so, labor, there are numbers that cannot be denied. You either worked the hours or you didn't work the hours. In 1938, the law was changed. There was an amendment to federal law that's most important today. It's called the Federal Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act was enacted by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1939. It was finally signed and amended. The Fair Labor Standards Act to this day is the reason your employer can't just not pay you. So it doesn't really matter whether a union discussion or they had a some type of union fight going on. The federal law would supersede that, so that if your employer, any of us, anywhere, we also have the EEOC. We know about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, right? So both of those standards uh, are really based on the Fair Labor Standards Act that started in 1938. And it's interesting because the president at that time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, coined a phrase that everyone knows, and it's called a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Every person is supposed to get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Matter of fact, it's illegal in America to work someone and not give them a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And that's why it was called the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1939. And that's what I'm basing it on because this is a federal law that's already on the books, and it's clear, you know, whether or not PTSD happened, we know it happened. Whether or not there's mental illness, we know there is. Whether or not we're traumatized on a regular basis, we know we are. We know that there's emotional distress that's associated with being Black in America, and we are owed damages for all those things. But those are damages. Anyone who's had any type of lawsuit knows whenever you have sued somebody or even been in a car accident, those are some of the factors that come into how much you'll get paid. What are your damages, right? But when you're talking about wages, that falls under a federal guideline that makes working someone illegal. Okay, now as far as the retroactive part, that part is where we must sell this president in particular on the fact of what's ethically, morally, and legally correct.
Mm.
The ethics are on our side because every man and every woman understands that everybody should be paid equally and that you should get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And that's why I want to start there because everyone would agree. Every white person, that's why I address them. Mr. White America, Miss White America, could you imagine your child, your daughter, your wife, your husband going to work every day and not getting a fair day's pay for a fair day's work? Well, if slaves worked, and we know they did because we know what they produced, we saw the cotton, we saw the tobacco, and this country profited from all those things, sugar cane, all types of other different products. At the time, cotton was the most valuable commodity on the planet. And so, just to, not really get too down into the weeds about, the different products, that's why we're focusing on that labor portion. In other words, if you know you worked an individual, and in this case, we're talking about 4 million people. Like I said, are there additional damages? Is there additional money owed? Of course. But let's start somewhere where we can simplify it down to one basic, objective. And that is one that no one can disagree with in this country or even around the world, because it's a universal law that if a person works, they should get paid.
Mm. Awesome. Now, I also want to play another portion of your speech or your address. Let me share my screen again. Let's see here.
But it is timeless and it has been used over and over because it's so true. Black man, black woman, united we stand. We have the momentum now. We have a movement, and they cannot stop us if we stick together. We declare that over 300 years of labor's wages, interest, dividends, and lands were stolen from black enslaved Americans and their descendants. We demand to be paid reparations for our damages, for PTSD, for other mental illnesses, all types of wealth gaps, for inhumane treatment, and all other recompenses. Today, it is calculated that each white family possesses over $140,000 more in assets than every black family. It should not be that way. If America's worth $100 trillion, then certainly 4 million slaves working for over 300 years contributed at least a third to that wealth.
Okay. That
Yeah, we do it.
Oh
You
my
want
gosh,
to
I
start,
don't know
is
how
brother?
you do it.
Sharon. Cool. Yeah. So you mentioned before, uh, speaking directly to white families.
Hmm.
Um, do you feel like that is even a case that needs to be made? Because at the end of the day, I know we'll have. So you always hear the numbers. The majority of the country does not support reparations. You hear those numbers, but if we were going by that, we would still be enslaved because at the time of slavery, the majority of the country, as far as their polling was concerned, was against the ending of slavery. So is that even, are you trying to reach out or trying to get the opinion of reparations swayed and moved on that level with just white citizenry, or are you going directly to the head of, I ain't gonna say the head of the snake, but are you going
You can say the
directly
head of the snake.
are you going directly to the crux of the problem, the head of the snake, and are you going straight for the top down? And I don't really care what is being said amongst the white citizenry. What are your views on that?
But we must always remember, once again, to go back to the analogy about getting funds from another source. There's two ways to get monies from a source that the world universally recognizes: voluntarily and involuntarily. That's a universal axiom all throughout the world and throughout the history of the world. When it's involuntary and you can take somebody's money, then that makes you the strongest man or the strongest army or the strongest conqueror, and you're able to go in and conquer them for their resources and take it. Even if you feel like they owe it to you, or you just decide this is what we are strong enough to do, so we do it. So if it's not involuntary, then what you're looking for is a voluntary release of funds. In order to make that happen, you make a mistake if you do not work within the framework of democracy. Democracy is the framework of America. Whether or not it's working the way it should, whether or not it's equitable, whether or not we've been discriminated against, whether or not, as we all know, systemic racism is rampant, and it was all based on an evil premise. But that doesn't change the fact of what the framework is right now. So we can't, at this moment, overtake via some military action and just say, we will make you give up these funds involuntarily. So we have to use the framework of politics and government, and the way the cities, states, counties, and the United States system works. The reason we call it systemic racism is because there is a system. So what we're trying to do, if we'll just keep our eye on the ball, sometimes we get angry, we get emotional. When we do that, we get out of logic. I was angry and bitter for a lot of years, and I make no bones about it. I don't hide from it. I'm a convicted felon, just like many of you. I'm no different than you. I've gone on to be a pastor. I've been married now 42 years. I got 6 grandchildren, and I've been blessed to make it through shootouts. I've been shot. I've been involved in robberies, burglaries, all kind of different things that you could think of because of anger and bitterness. But this is what anger and bitterness does. It causes you to act on emotion. And it's why our children, especially our young men, kill each other in the streets. We're operating on emotion. So now what matters to me most is how I feel. You disrespected me. So what we're saying with reparations now is, let's get away from that. And we have to say, what is the framework we're operating within? And where are the trillions of dollars? They're not in my hands. They're not in your hands. They're not in our banks. They're in white banks. If they're in white banks, that includes more than just the president, the head of the snake. He has the power to open the banks and open the vaults. He's been given a mandate by the vote of the people. Over 80, somewhere near 80 million people voted this man in office. So you want a majority of those people, if you can, to side with your issue, because what that does is that makes his decision so much easier. If you have a majority of those people who voted for this man to put him in office, who say, oh, we oppose this, even if he would love to do it, it makes it almost impossible for him to do, because now he's cutting his nose off to spite his face. And he still may be. I actually believe that God is going to move Joe Biden's heart in a special way, that even if he's cutting his nose off to spite his face, which is basically just an old time saying to say the man's got to run for re-election again. And if he's going to get re-elected, he's going to have those same people, but that includes black descendants of slaves. You know what we did to get him elected? We stood 6 hours, 8 hours sometimes. We were out there like no other force. Black voters matter. Remember that. Remember what we've done. But white voters matter too. So that's why we got to sway them. I want to read something to you that after I put that video out, I got a very belligerent response from a white conservative newspaper.
Mm.
And at first it said, David Rice, I don't owe you anything. I never had any slaves, and you can kiss my ass. Okay. Now, this was clearly, I knew it was a white citizen just because of the conservative newspaper it was.
Mm.
And I put the video in there purposely so that, just like you're saying, why would I want to reach those people? Because I need to practice. We need to practice turning minds and hearts around. This is what Dr. King's movement, why it superseded even Malcolm X. Certainly, we can go by any means necessary, but that's only going to take you so far. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're not stronger than the other team, you're not going to win. You're
Right.
going to lose. Matter of fact, they're going to love it. That's what they want. They want
Yeah.
a race war. They would love for you to step up when you're not ready to do that, so
Mm-hmm.
they can treat you like Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that. But what King was able to do was to sway the thinking. Barack Obama said, "The better angels," and
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we know about. Everybody still knows what's right. It's like the big lie that's going on right now. We all know what the big lie is. They
Mm-hmm.
know that's a lie. Okay. They knew slavery was a lie. They
Mm-hmm.
knew it was a lie, that these were not people. But since they were willing to stick with the lie because they felt like it made their life better, somewhere their hearts had to be changed. Their minds had to be changed. It had to make more sense for them to do the right thing than to continue doing the wrong thing. So even if they felt like it was for the right reason, okay, now that's a whole nother, philosophical discussion. But let
Mm-hmm.
me read to you what Rich Holmes wrote. He said, "To begin with, I will apologize to you for my rude response. This was after I wrote back to him very sensibly
Mm.
about what we're talking about, the value of the labor. Federal President Roosevelt saying a day's pay is, what a man should get for a day's work. To
Mm-hmm.
begin with," Rich says, "I will apologize to you for my rude response, which was reactionary and unwarranted. I agree that the treatment of blacks in this country was and is, to a degree, still unconscionable. No rational person can deny that fact. I can also agree that slaves contributed to the generation of wealth while enjoying no compensation and being deprived of freedom, as well as suffering unimaginable hardship. These points are not disputable." That's where I want their minds to be.
Mm.
These points are not disputable. He then says, "It then follows that direct descendants of slaves were deprived of wealth that arguably would have been passed on to them. Now, regarding reparations, as a retired accountant, I will say first that the calculation of damages owed direct descendants of slaves would be extremely nuanced." Now, listen to how in depth his thinking now is on the subject, and he's come over to our side.
Mm.
Imagine what we can do when I'm able to speak to hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions soon,
Mm.
about these same issues. So, yes, we want to win them over. That makes Joe Biden's Matter of fact, you can make so much pressure. It's like when George Floyd's torture and murder happened. It was a spontaneous response of righteousness from every person's heart and mind. They didn't even think about what their color was. They thought about, this is a horrible atrocity and it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I must do something, because nobody wants the knees on the back of anybody, any human, and the knees on the neck of a person for 9 minutes until that person
Mm-hmm.
dies of strangulation. So, in the same way, we want their hearts and minds to say what this guy is saying. And he went from being a hard butt about it to turning around completely.
Exactly. That's wonderful. I love that. And as they say, politics is war without bloodshed. So, and we don't have the arms, so we have to go about it a different way. What do you say to those that say, and we deal with everybody is basically like, what's in it for me? So what do
Of
you say
course.
to what do you say to those that say, like he said, my ancestors, or I personally didn't own any slaves.
Mm-hmm.
The descendants of chattel slavery weren't enslaved personally. So what does it benefit me to make sure that y'all get reparations? How does that benefit me? So how do you make that case?
Well, I think we make the case from a basis of incentives. And this country, the government, I'm also a veteran. So I did learn a lot of things about the military and about the way this nation likes to deal with adversaries. We've all heard this term, I'll say most people have, the carrot or the stick.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can get the carrot or you can get the stick. So, similarly, the what's in it for you is, Mr. White America, Miss White America, is you get a better degree of peace, prosperity, and the pursuit of your own happiness when those at the bottom are pleased with where they are, and they once again can start to regain faith in democracy and faith in their country. It's time for you to use a carrot. So you've already used the stick. You've been using the stick for 300 years. You've been on our backs for 300 years. You've been on my neck for 300 years. You've tortured me enough. I am George Floyd. We all are George Floyd. Get off my back, get off my neck, and give me a carrot, and you'll see a much better citizen for centuries to come. Because what they've got to consider is, if things are like this now, what's it going to be for their grandchildren and their great grandchildren?
Right.
With
Yeah.
everybody having weapons now, everybody's got handguns. I don't care what your
Mm-hmm.
color, race, creed, no matter what your social economic status is, everybody's got guns.
Right.
So if it's like I told you earlier when we first met, if a man or a woman is deprived of faith, they lose their faith, then they begin to lose hope. Once you lose hope, then you come into despair. Once you despair, then you make a man or a woman desperate. And when they're desperate, desperate times call for desperate measures. And that's where any means necessary comes in. So
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, you can either deal with us with the carrot or the stick, or we can deal with you with the carrot or the stick.
Mm.
Which would you prefer? And I think we all know that we have a better world when we're all back to a place of faith and hope. And so,
Mm.
what this money is going to do is it's going to put faith and hope back into, especially so many young people. Imagine
Mm.
a young man now with no hope as compared to, excuse me, I don't know if you can see that. I think that's just on my screen.
Yeah. Just
As compared to what his hope would be when he turns 16 and he realizes, man, I got $150,000 trust out there. All I have to do is graduate from high school, keep a job, and I'll qualify to buy a new home, and I'll get part of my $100,000. That's an incentive. So that's
Mhm.
what's in it for you, Mr. White Man, Mr. White
Mhm.
Woman.
You can feel safe to walk your dog in the neighborhood. You know. So in closing, what's next? Give us an update on currently what's going on right now, and what you looking at in the recent future.
Well, in the next couple of weeks, I've already got in the works scheduling some public events here in Atlanta, and I'll be announcing the exact dates of those. Most likely, they won't happen until right around the end of July, first part of August. So that dates are to be determined, and it's going to be two speaking engagements. One will be in a public square, and another will be most likely at one of Atlanta's churches or governmental offices. On August 17th, I've been invited to a forum. I wish everyone to tune in. It's a Marcus Garvey Day celebration. It's hosted by To Be New, which is a activist organization out of Oakland, California. And the Bay Area has a huge Marcus Garvey celebration. They'll have music, they'll have several forums, and we've been invited to be a part of that. I invite you to join with me there, and I'll be speaking and kind of debating. I'll be debating the repatriation groups that want to take us back to Africa. My
Mm.
position on that, real briefly, and not to tell everything I'm going to speak on, but is that once you get your reparations, you can do whatever you want to with it.
Right.
Keep your citizenship, keep your
Mhm.
reparations account open, and you can be in Ghana, you can be in Nigeria, you can be wherever you are want to be, because
Right.
now you've got your reparations trust fund.
Exactly. And as Pan Africans, they should be all for us getting reparations here, because therefore everyone in the diaspora being in a good position. So they shouldn't have any opposition with
Right.
us getting
Exactly.
reparations here. So I don't think that's going to be a hard sell for you at all. Um, so I look forward to that, man. Uh,
Yeah, that's August 17th. Once again, put it on your calendars. August 17th. I think that's a Saturday. I can't remember the day. And then after that, we're going to try to head to Washington. And we got some buses already going with the People's Agenda. And so we're going to try to put several Reparations Now representatives there too, so we can meet with the Congressional Black Caucus. And my plan is to hand deliver the demands to the White House.
okay, and that's August 29th or 28th or some. We'll get
Yeah,
that.
we'll firm that up.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Great, David Rice. You got anything else you want to add? Anything
No, I
close?
mean it's a pleasure to be with you, brother. And Raymond Jones, just keep up the fight, my brother.
Thank you, and you do the same. We here.
United we stand.
Oh man, already. Talk to you soon, brother.
All right, have a good night.
All right. Take care.